Hey everyone, CJ here with the CHSAA Secondary School Podcast with an exciting announcement about the CHSAA Small Grant Program. CHSAA is proud to support our members with small grants to help them excel in their work. Each year, we award 4 $200 grants to deserving athletic trainers. You can use this money for durable medical equipment, supplies, or continuing education units. All you need to do to be eligible is be an NATA member who resides in Colorado. The application deadline for this fall is September 1st, so be sure to apply for a chance to get the support you need. For all details and to submit your application, head over to the CHSAA website under grants or go to www.coloradoata.org/small-grant-program. Good luck. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the CHSAA Secondary School Podcast. Alongside Ryan Hart, I am CJ Rosenborough, and we are talking pre-participation physicals. Ryan, you have no thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, absolutely no thoughts. Coming from the east out to the gunslinging western slopes of Colorado, where you guys, back when I was first brought onto this committee by our current CHSAA president, Jeb. That was the actual reason why, because I would not leave him alone about the ridiculous way that Colorado is mandating pre-participation physicals. I was like, how is this not standardized? How are ATs not allowed to collect all of the, medical history of the athletes and charged under their care? And Jeb was like, I have a great committee for you to serve on, for you to make noise. So
thanks, Jeb.
After 2 years of being on this committee and finally weaving my way in, now that Scott missed a meeting and I was able to suggest we do a podcast series, we can finally talk about my topic of Colorado's lackadaisical attitude towards pre-participation physical. So I'm excited for this hot topic, CJ.
Yeah, me too. And before we dive deep in, because we have a tendency to just go off the deep end right off the bat, I want to introduce everyone else who's here. So we're joined by our co-chair, Katie. We're joined by Celty, Moto, and Megan as well. So we're going to dive right into it. Ryan, I had a similar experience to you. I went to grad school in Virginia. I went to undergrad in Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. Coming out to Colorado, it was a stark difference. Yes. I was like, wait, we don't collect PPEs. I don't get access to them. I don't verify them and I'll check them. It was crazy.
Yes.
So I'm glad that we're moving forward. We're catching up with kind of what best practice is.
Absolutely, CJ. And so let's kick it off. Moto, why don't you start us off with our first hot topic debate about PPEs?
I don't know about this is going to be a debate. It was, I'm more curious about, this is my second year in high school setting, and in the college setting, it was just requirement.
Mm-hmm.
What was the history and what was it like to start?
Yeah, Katie, why don't you take over that question and give our listeners a little bit of, where we stand in Colorado.
Yeah, I think important to say, Ryan, the Wild Wild West is right. Like pre this current form that is mandated this year, there was no standard form. Every school could have their own form. Some, and I would say most, were just a signature line from the doctor that said cleared to play. You got no other information with it, and the schools could make a choice as to what other questions they would want. The actual provider who was signing the physical would keep the documentation, but the school was not being given access to that information. So I think starting there, I want to rewind a little bit. The data all belonged to the school before this form, and I think it still belongs to the school as far as the schools are concerned. That being said, big reminder to everyone listening, yes, there are a lot of athletic trainers in this state. There is only sports medicine coverage at a third of the high schools in the state of Colorado. So when we talk about CHSAA mandating a form, we have to talk about CHSAA covers every high school in the state that participates in the organization. So you're talking about 2/3 of those schools not having an athletic trainer who needed access to that information. So I think our SMAC committee does a really good job of representing who needs to have the information. But I think this was a big step forward when they're like, hey, if you have medical professionals at your school, there needs to be someone going through the participation physicals to make sure that if there's a history of potential cardiac event, potential whatever, that we're documenting that, making sure everyone's aware of it, all of that information. But before this kind of really hit us 2 to 3 years ago, there was no standardized collection. There was no standardized form. There was nothing. So I think it became a bigger deal of saying, well, where does the information get saved? Who has access to it? What legal problems are we going to face with it? All of this kind of came at us at once. And so here we are now saying we actually have a now required form to catch up with other states and make Colorado higher on that list of safe sports in the United States. But it was definitely because there was a lack of collection of data for it.
And I think that's still an issue right now. From my understanding, the reason only page 4 is required is there was concerns of how to store that, which to me doesn't make sense because schools they're FERPA. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know, well, they have school nurses, so HIPAA does.
HIPAA applies.
It applies to them.
FERPA, both.
Yes, but they have ways to safeguard this information. So I never quite understood that because they're already having to safeguard information anyways. But that was the reasoning behind only providing page 4. And you're absolutely right. It used to only be a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, especially for the county that I worked in. It was the physician would essentially just fill in this one sentence saying, I have evaluated, enter name for participation in sports. They're clear to participate without restriction. And then the physician would sign it. So they would just they would actually have the athlete or the parent write in the name and then they would sign it or stamp it. That is all we got, which is not good enough. So I'm glad to see this change. But as for page 4, it sounds like that data collection and the privacy of it was kind of the sticking point of why we couldn't get all 4 pages and instead just get page 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Katie did bring up a really good point. This is the first step for the state of Colorado. And I think our SMAC committee did a really good job of introducing the state to a well thought out first step. And I think it's going to be up to athletic trainers as well as the continuation of the SMAC committee to continue advancing how we are managing these PPEs, to get caught up with other states who are further along. When and CJ, you're probably going to speak to this as well, coming from the East Coast. From the East Coast, I mean, we had crossed this bridge like a decade ago. And so coming out here, it was a stark difference. But I will say it is, and Moto mentioned this in the beginning. Coming from the collegiate setting, usually in the collegiate setting, all of that is kind of done in-house. Like he mentioned, it's a requirement. They bring in physicians. Everybody's required to show up. And having now spent a decade, almost 12 years in the private secondary school, that's exactly how we managed it as well. We set CHSAA's bar of collecting the 4th page as a bare minimum. And we, as a private school institute, required the collection of all, as well as our own consent forms surrounding HIPAA, surrounding things like concussions, sudden cardiac arrest. I think it is important for some athletic trainers to know, maybe if you're in a private school, I won't speak to the public because it's been many years since I've worked in the public school and not in the state of Colorado, but in the private school, you're not bound by some of those restrictions. You can add to the PPE with your own waiver forms. You can require collection of the entire packet in the private sector. And I'm not sure if early emerging professional athletic trainers maybe going into the private secondary school setting know that. You're not as handcuffed as you are with a district public school.
Okay, I'm gonna
Moto
pull out
or
my
Katie?
soapbox.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie. Have at it.
It's a little one. I'll stay on topic as best I can. I think the words you use, the minimum standard, is the correct wording here. But I'm going to tell you how I ended up on this committee as I aggressively approached Jeb and said, I'm angry. When we were in the bottom of the 50 states, I was angry. We are good athletic trainers in this state, and I was mad. So this was one of the steps we took. Corey Stringer Institute came out. This was the biggest one that came out of our meeting with them, was getting the appropriate PPEs in place. The SMAC committee was there. Other athletic trainers were there. Other stakeholders in CHSAA were there. And this was the one that was decided would be the biggest impact for us. And we have made a large jump in the years since that survey came out that put Colorado at the bottom. We're no longer at the bottom. And so this was a step that made me very happy. It is a minimum standard. You can collect more if you want to. Please do, and use the information appropriately. And that should be said to everyone, the athletic trainers, the athletic directors, the schools. But I think knowing that this is a minimum standard for us was a big step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I do want to preface, you guys have already said this, but I think it's worth saying again. I want to give a huge shout out to the SMAC committee. The amount of work that those men and women have put in getting this pushed forward is awesome. And we will be critical of this, but that is not to say that they did not do a good job. Is to say there's still more work to be done. So I want to kind of put that disclaimer out there because we are super grateful for their help and everything they've done to help push us forward.
Yes.
But to Katie's point, this is a minimum standard and it gets us this huge step forward, but doesn't get us across the finish line of where we need to be. And I think, Ryan, to kind of clarify on your point for public schools, to my knowledge, there you can require more. Like CHSAA is saying you have to give the page 4. There's nothing saying you cannot be provided the other 3 pages, but it has to be a district policy. So you can't just go to your principal or your AD and be like, hey, I want these sheets. And then they might say yes. There's nothing to stop them, but it's a lot easier if you go to the district AD and whatever organization you have and they say, hey, we need these 4 sheets. Here's why. I think that argument is going to be a lot easier after this year based on what I saw last year. We started rolling out the PPEs and we just took it off our website, the old one, and we put the new one on for CHSAA. And what happened was we were getting page 4 or we're getting all 4 pages, which is how I found out about this issue is we would get page 4. Nothing would be filled out except for the physician part. I'd have an athlete name at the top, no contact information for the parent, no address, no nothing. I would have no information, which invalidates the form because the form has to be completed completely. The parent or athlete wouldn't even sign it. So it was just the physician part, which that's one issue. These need to be completed forms. This is the only way we're getting this information. And 2, there's an issue of the physicians are already filling out everything from page 1 to 3 or page 2 to 3. I don't know which one they actually fill out. I think the parents fill out page 1. Anyways, they fill out everything on the prior 3 pages. So they're like, well, why am I filling out redundant information? So I've actually gotten 4 pages where on page 2 or 3, it says the athlete is type 1 diabetic, needs this, has this. And then on page 4, it says no restrictions for activity, nothing I need to know. If I had only gotten page 4, I have no clue that this kid has type 1 diabetes unless the parents disclose that. That's a major issue and hurdle that we have to overcome. And that's a good way to talk to your AD about it or your district AD and say, hey, here's why. Because we can't be reactive with this. That's the whole point of PPEs is be proactive. If there's a cardiac issue that I don't know about and they put it on page 2 or 3, but then they just do the page 4 as they've done in the past where they just sign it and provide it, we're not getting that information. Then all of a sudden this PPE is not doing what it was intended to do. And it's now just kind of useless to us, honestly. It's actually more than useless because it's actually giving us false information. So I think that's a huge point that we have to address. And going forward, it should be easier because we'll all figure out how our schools are doing it. We can have those conversations. People will learn. It's a pilot year, but wanted to throw that out there. Megan.
just sort of a question. I don't know if there's anybody on this call who can answer it or kind of piggybacks off what you were saying. Because we last year and then again this year are telling our families, like, you only have to submit page 4. And so how do you kind of change that language, especially when, and I'm looking at it now, that the form says on page 4, submit only this page to your school.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you then asking families, advocating to your district, things like that, when the form itself says on page 2, 1, 2, and 3, that like this is for the healthcare provider, it should not be turned into the school. So if the form says that, how are we then advocating that we do need, like, I understand why, like, personally, like what you were saying, I feel the same way. I'm like, there's information on that page that I need access to as an athletic trainer. But then when the form from CHSAA says, do not turn this into your school, how are we managing that?
I think the way that I addressed it is I'm contracted through my company to provide services to my school. I do not work for my school, I work at my school in conjunction with them. So I am a healthcare professional. To my point of view, I fall under that instruction of provide to your healthcare provider. Like, provide it to people who need to know this information. Your school doesn't really need to know that. They need to know if you're cleared to play or not. But we need to get additional information from that. And that's kind of how I tackled it. I'm not an AD just making sure they're cleared to play sports. I'm the healthcare professional on the scene. I need to know these things. That's what the PPE is for. And that helped. But yes. Any thoughts on that, Ryan? I know you're kind of biting at the bit.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It comes down to education, but more importantly, it comes down to, what we were talking about earlier. This is the first step. I think there were mistakes made, I think. I think statements like that should not have been put on the form because it can bind healthcare providers up. But I also think that it's an area for SMAC to address and make corrections and kind of tear down some of those walls for healthcare providers like athletic trainers to more easily access this information. Katie, any follow-up thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, I think that was one of our biggest issues we faced too, where I was also a contract outside the school. And what I had started giving out at parent meetings was, listen, if I don't have the information, there's no way for me to get it. It's got to be on your forms and you got to do it. So we actually took it and changed our athletic registration process. And so they're filling it out multiple times. And it for sure could be made easier by just being able to enter your data once and not have to continue. But it's constant. When you register your kid for school in the first place, your parents think that when they enter their kids' information the one time, it's in there. And it's just not. And so I continuously, like, if a parent came up to me and was like, well, my kid has this, but I already told the school, so I left it blank on their physical, or I left it blank in athletic registration. And I'm like, no, please don't do that. I don't have access to that, so I need it. So it's a communication breakdown. And if you're at the little clinic and you're seeing 45 of these a day because it's the first day of fall sports and nobody got their physical done on time and you can't practice if you aren't registered. Sorry, CJ, that was fast. The AI is going to be mad. But if you're seeing 50 kids a day to zip them through these physicals, taking the time to write all the information down on the form, the biggest point I have with this is the last page of the form should be what's focused on. And I think there just needs to be a clause that says, focus on this page, put the information on this page, because it does have those couple of spots where you put this is the important information. It just needs to be copied to that back page. Who needs to do that? I'm not sure. But I think that's the important piece. If we're going to only collect page 4 needs to be the page that's focused on.
Yeah, so Ryan, I'm going to pop in front of you real fast. That's a really cool point. Do we know why, like, providers are putting their stuff into whatever EMR they have? Why do they need page 2, 3 where they're filling out this stuff just to be given right back to them? That I hadn't actually thought about that before, but that's a really good point. Like,
because it's a
already in their
medical
system.
history they put in their documentation.
Yeah,
Well, and part
But they
of
already
it,
have it.
No, what it comes back to, because I faced this my first year when I attended the mass physical day that's conducted in the Valley, is proprietary information to that clinic. So when they're collecting that patient data, that's their HIPAA compliant data. It's not, they have to retain it, which was interesting, and I do think this also needs to be brought up a lot of times. And to Katie's point, talking about misinformation, like, oh, the parents provided it to the school already, so they didn't include it here. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that most athletic trainers are contracted and placed at a school. They're not employed by the school, so they oftentimes they don't have access to systems of the school. It was a very different situation for me being in the private sector, because I was employed by the school and I had a lot more of those autonomy. But I definitely understand where athletic trainers are coming from when they're employed by an outside organization and there's that huge disconnect. And at the end of the day, it does come back down to having those honest conversations with the parents, having those honest conversations with the athletic staff, and explaining why we need this information. Like multiple of us have said, we're the first point of contact, the healthcare provider for that athlete during an emergency situation. And it's no different than your kid going to see the doctor and they pull up their medical records, their chart. It's no different. At least from the way that we view it as athletic trainers when it comes to the healthcare of our student athletes. The more information, the better. Did you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, so kind of the same thing that Katie was saying, like with registration, I had a really good relationship with my athletic department at the school, even though I was employed by an outside entity and then contracted. But over the many, many years that I was at my school, we were smaller, so I know it's a little different situation in trying to get everything organized, especially when you have, 2,000 athletes versus I had about 400 athletes. But when they did registration, I did have access to the registration. And when we were going through like what was going to be mandatory and like it was always so interesting when people would try and go through the process, there were hard stops. So if they didn't put in medications, if they didn't put in medical conditions, if they didn't do that, they weren't able to continue on in the process, therefore not getting registered. And then I was just in talking with our athletic department on what was going to be best practices and safe, the most safe situations with a lot of these kids and as many sports as we had. I was the final okay. And I think we had Arbiter was our registration, and it literally came to me at the very end, and I had to check that the physical was uploaded, that last page was uploaded, and that they had everything. And if there was something that was typed in besides NA or then it red flagged for me. So I was able to look at it and say, oh, okay, this kid has this or is on this medication, or we're looking at these issues, or broke their arm last year, or has had 3 concussions that they're doing. And then we also took it a step forward, and I made a Google Doc that I shared with our school nurse. And so when she had things that would happen, we would both update that form. Probably not as updated as I would have liked it to be at the time, just because we had so many things that were going on. But if she found out like, oh, they didn't tell us that they had this issue or this issue, or that they were taking this medication or this medication, and one of us found out about it, we were able to update that form to each other as well. So I think it too is having that communication, that relationship with your athletic director and with the school to let them know. If they don't know that you need that information, then they're not going to make it. It's not a priority for them. They just need the sign sheet. That's all that they care about for the kids, and making sure that they're dotting their I's, crossing their T's, checking their boxes. And that was a big conversation that I had with the school, that I said I have to have this information.
You
for
really
the kids
bring
to
up
be
a
able
really
to be
good
safe.
point, and that's exactly how I approached it when I was working back in Atlanta. We we were a private school, but we had a huge facility. We had 3 school nurses. We had learning coaches for every grade. It was nursery through 12th. So everybody from 4th graders, which were rising football players, so they even had their own training program during the summers. But we did the exact same thing, and that's what I love about athletic trainers. Oftentimes, athletic trainers will find they'll think outside the box, and they'll find workarounds, things like using a shared Google Doc between the school nurse and you. We did the exact same thing back in Atlanta for concussions. We had a CERT team that was made up of like 23 healthcare providers, everybody from the school psychologists, which there were 3 of, the school nurses, there were 3 of, the learning coaches, which there was 1 for each grade. It really allowed for increased communication. I think you brought a really good point to that. If you're an athletic trainer and you are trying to fight the system, try just having some simple conversations. Try reaching out to those decision makers at your school or at your district and say, hey, here's some of the challenges that I'm facing. Is there a way that we can work together to improve this? Whether if it's through some form of a shared Google Doc, whether if it's through maybe even changing how the school is collecting information. Oftentimes they're using a system that you can easily add additional boxes to for the parents to complete during their registration process. So if there's information that you're needing for sports medicine, a lot of times that can be asked on the front end, and it's just a matter of some simple, modifications to their enrollment process.
Yeah, as much as we would like this to be a clean cut, this is what it is. This is relationship building.
Yes.
Comes into play a huge part of this, because this is an extra lift for the school to do. If you're wanting this extra information, like Katie said, they just need that last sheet. That's all. That's all they really care about. So if you're asking for more, sorry, it was Celty. If you're asking for more, have that good relationship, have a conversation with your AD and your athletic secretary and say, hey, here's why I need this. Here's why it's important. I understand it's more work for you guys, but it's something that parents and families will get in the hang of filling this out correctly. If you let ones go that aren't filled out correctly, it's going to make more work. But it ultimately comes down to the school to collect that, because the school is the one collecting the physical. So you have to have them on your side so that they are just as passionate about getting this information so that it can go to you to make sure the kids are safe. Because if you don't do a good enough job making that argument of here's why I need it, they're not going to see it as a priority, and they're going to say, well, CHSAA doesn't require it. And I've heard this argument so many times. They think CHSAA is just do what CHSAA says and you don't have to do anything more. And they just view it as if CHSAA says we don't need the other 3 pages, then we don't need it. So you need to make that argument and have a good relationship with them and say, here's why I need it. Here's CHSAA's they're setting the bar here. There's nothing saying we can't go above and beyond to make sure our kids are safer, which we should do because that's best practice nationwide. And have that conversation, get them on your side, have them understand so that they can be an advocate. And then when parents come to them angry because their physical got pushed back, they can explain, well, here's why we need it. Here's how we're looking out for your athlete's best interest. But it's all about building that relationship, because without that, you're just going to run your head first into a wall trying to get this thing
CJ,
changed.
I want to turn this over to Katie, but I think it's also important to mention, if you are going to come to your school with a problem, also come with a solution. Problem and no solution to it. Katie, thoughts? Perfect.
Yeah, Ryan, thanks. You just led me into my thought process perfectly. Love that. I think that this topic, just through what everyone has said, is a little overwhelming by the amount of upfront work that's required and a little bit of experience work that's required. There are school nurses, there are administrative assistants, there are a host of people who can help you with this, first of all. So I think you need to start there. Second of all, the smaller schools, it is for sure easier to do. There's just significantly less paperwork to keep track of. But before you get overwhelmed and say, no, I'm not doing that, I'm going to accept the minimum standard, think about how much easier life is if you have that information. If you have access at your fingertips that says, this kid is anaphylactic to bee stings, and I'm on the football field and he's saying, I just got stung by a bee, and it's easily accessible in my EMR system that says that, because I've already flagged it at the beginning of the season, life is easier that way, right? Oh, this kid's a diabetic. We need to be sure there's sugar in the kit for the coaches. Now, that there's a realm of, yes, the parent needs to be involved. Everyone needs to be involved. But if you're all working together and, like Celty said, have the nurses on your page and you have a shared document where they're uploading it too, so you're all managing these athletes together, life is easier that way. So forward thinking it, positive thinking it, say, this is how I want to run my sports medicine program, not, oh my gosh, I'm going to shut down. I don't want to do that. If you're doing it that way, you're not being the best athletic trainer you can be
Katie.
for your
Megan,
students.
did you have a follow-up thought on that?
From a while ago, so it can be edited in wherever. But it was to CJ's point about, like, why is this document so long? Why is page 1, 2, 3 even necessary if it's being housed in the, and I think it, from my understanding, goes back to, I think it was what Katie brought up about the little clinic is seeing 40 kids the day before sports start. And so they're brushing through things, and addressing how many of our physicals are done at the little clinic, or the, for us, it's another clinic in town kind of things. The AAP guidelines and their recommendations, especially post 2020, were that athletes get their sports physicals done in their medical home. But I think we all understand that a lot of these kids don't have a medical home. More and more, we're seeing kids who don't have a pediatrician that they're regularly seeing. And so ideally, if they're getting their sports physical done in their medical home, page 1, 2, and 3 are superfluous because it's information they already have. But if they're going to the little clinic, if they're going to a local clinic, those pages are important in that these people probably don't have their background information. And as we all know, kids are like, oh yeah, by the way, yes, I did have a maternal relative who died at 40 from a cardiac event. Like, that's something we need to dig into more. And so that's why those pages, I think, are important for those kids who are seen at places that aren't their medical home.
The small community, for sure, is the accessibility of the healthcare, and also usually a student will have a well child visit. Those are the timing that they're able to bring their form, if they have PCP. But on the other hand, community, especially in Colorado too, as well. But we do have we have a few international students, or people who is moving in to the town, and they might not even have any history of anything to start with PCP that we have.
And I cross this a lot back on the East Coast, and it is the same here. I don't think it's well known. Wellness visits are not sports physical visits. There is no sports physical that's covered under any insurance plan. Sports are electives. And I think a lot of times physicians are gracious enough, and we appreciate them doing this for the parents. They'll bundle a sports physical in with the wellness exam, which can be fine unless the wellness exam falls in the middle of your sports season. And then there's insurance. Insurance will never allow you to have a sports physical on the same day, or have an annual wellness on the same day that you did the previous year. It always has to be offset by a day. And so what eventually happens throughout the child's high school career is that date keeps getting pushed further and further back, offsetting the validity of the sports physical. And a lot of parents get confused by this. A lot of parents get upset by this. I always make it a point to educate the parents that your child participating in sports is an elective that is not covered under any insurance plan. Oftentimes there's a $25, $35, $45 fee for sports physical. If your physician is gracious enough to bundle that in with the wellness exam, that's totally fine. But just keep in mind that can cause issues down the road as the seasons progress. Additionally, oftentimes physicals, like Moto was saying, when your child's going to a clinic, they're not familiar with PPE forms most of the time. If they're just going to a walk-in urgent care clinic or something like that, those physicians may not be as up to date on the forms that are currently being used, and oftentimes that's where we get mismanagement of the forms. So I do think it's important for athletic trainers to know this, especially our emerging professional athletic trainers, those who are just coming out of school. They're not familiar with the nuances of, how physicals are done, the insurance side of physicals, and the parent frustration side of physicals. But it's important to have that knowledge so that when you are faced with those questions and concerns from the parents, you understand how to address them. Here's why we're recommending you participate in this sports physical day, or here's why we're recommending you go to this specific, physician group to have your sports physical done. Is for these nuances. If you can encourage all of your student athletes to get a physical during the summer months and not based on their annual wellness, now that physical is valid throughout the entire academic school year, not based on the child's date of birth. And that really does affect how coverage works in terms of liability when you have a lapse in coverage from the date of physical, because the PPE is valid from the date of the physician's signature. And I get a lot of parents who say, well, the physical was done on this date, and you start looking through the forms and it's like, no, that's when you filled it out. I was like, that's not when the physical is valid. It's valid based on the date of the physician. Or oftentimes the physician will forget to put the date, and now you're left kind of calling the physician's office, trying to get the date, hoping that the parents filled it out on the same day. There's a lot of legality nuances that you have to wade through.
And I'll be honest, I thought our mass physicals process was better because we had the athletic trainers from the schools going through the medical history and highlighting them. So when they went into the physicians, their medical history points that were necessary were highlighted. But when COVID happened and our orthos no longer wanted to be the ones signing the sports physical forms, it was brought up and we had a full discussion with our doctors about it. And we had orthos who didn't want to listen to heart and lungs. And isn't that what we're trying to catch on the physical form anyway? And so we stopped doing our mass physicals based on that alone, because we didn't want just anybody listening to heart and lungs. We wanted the doctors who were actually going to catch something, not saying that our orthos weren't going to catch it if it was really obscure, but we wanted the actual testing to be done by someone who would hear it. And so I do think the office practice of doing it is very helpful in this case. Now, we protected ourselves by saying your sports physical does not take the place of a doctor's appointment. Please do your annual screening with your doctor to catch anything that might be lost in this 15-minute exam that we're providing. And we were providing orthopedic screens as we were doing it. It wasn't a medical appointment. And so I think when we're looking at it, what are we trying to catch with the PPE form? We're trying to prevent sudden cardiac death. We're trying to prevent that type of thing. Yeah, we can catch asthma and other things on this form, but the major death things that we are trying to prevent are the ones that get caught in this appointment. And that's why the full physical exam is necessary. So to me, when we started having that conversation, it made a lot more sense to have the full appointment
I guess
involved.
how it's been managed here in Colorado versus out on the East Coast. Initially when I started working in the Atlanta area, I worked for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and we crossed that bridge. We ran into the legal liabilities of physicians not wanting to participate in sports physicals and take on the liability of missing something because they're processing so many athletes in a short amount of time. And we got so much pushback from our parents about not offering mass sports physicals anymore to our student athletes that we ended up getting creative. And I'm going to give you a solution of what we did. I don't know if it'll help anybody in the state of Colorado, but what we ended up doing, because I had affiliations, I was no longer working for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I was then employed by the school when we started moving into our own mass sports physical day. But we started bringing in other healthcare providers that were outside of the realm of orthopedics. We started bringing in our school nurses to take blood pressure, pulse, and we started bringing in family practitioners or non-sports related physicians to do things like you mentioned, heart and lung sounds. And then we would have our functional screenings done by PTs. And then we would have, at the very end of the station, that was where our orthos would be, and they would do the final check off. And it really seemed to work, and it caught both of the best worlds. It addressed the issues that Katie was mentioning, but it also addressed the issues that Megan was talking about, where it really is good if you're in a situation and can hold your own school's sports physical day. It's really the best case scenario where you're going to capture the information that you need and ensure that you have all of the data points necessary for a successful season. Because what I ended up seeing as the overall admin running the event, when a physician had a flag, they would immediately call for me. I would go to that station, wherever that physician had a concern, and we would discuss it. Hey, Ryan, I'm sitting here listening, to this kid's, lung sounds or whatever the case is, as an example. And here's my concern. I'm going to send them for a follow-up with a cardiologist. And we would actually have a discussion about it with the parents, with the athlete, with the physician. And now I, as the athletic trainer, am a part of that decision making as to how this is going to affect athletics and how this athlete is going to perform and what I need to be aware of. And I took that from the collegiate setting when I worked in the D2 level setting. I learned some of that, the staging of mass sports physicals, and how you as the athletic trainer can really get on the front side of the student athlete's health. I mean, you think about how invaluable that is to be there with the patient, with the parent, with the physician, discussing, hey, here's our concerns, here's our game plans. I'm not reading it way after the fact on a sports physical. And the worst thing that I always got frustrated with was when I had a sports physical that they were not cleared, referred to cardiologists, and then the parents would say, oh yeah, we went and saw the cardiologist, he was cleared by the cardiologist. Well, where's the note from the cardiologist? Oh, I didn't know I needed to bring a note from the cardiologist. It's like, you just think about this from a larger perspective and how we as athletic trainers can start going above and beyond and thinking more outside the box, and how we can insert ourselves more into the overall picture of the student athlete's healthcare. And I think that there's more possibilities than individuals realize. And I want to reassure both, I understand Megan's perspective. I understand Katie's perspective, and there are ways to work around it. Not in every scenario. Public schools may have very different regulations as to what they can and cannot do, but it all starts with having conversations. It all starts with making connections, having, being a part of your community of healthcare providers, and being well known amongst your student athletes and your parents. CJ?
Yeah, I was just going to add, you can use that as to your benefit, because the PPE, like mass physical, they're a lot of times crazy and people are running around like insane people, but usually have stations that they have to run through. You can set up and be that last station, and they leave the physicians out. They come straight to you. You scan in their page 2, 3, 4, page 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
And then you bypass it. Like you're catching a lot of whatever
mistakes.
You're catching it early. You can review it. You're getting it in your system. You're not having to wait to get it from the school to then send it to you. It cuts down on work that they have to do.
You have a copy. The parents keep the original hard copy.
Exactly.
That's
just
the way
one
we
extra
run
step.
them.
Like, okay, after see the physician, go see the AT. All right, I'm going to scan it in. Okay, now you're good to leave.
Yep.
You can get a certain percentage, but like Megan mentioned, that's easier at a small school. That's probably not feasible at a larger school. But there's probably other things you can do. Like you don't have to be the only one scanning it. You can have a couple other people helping to scan it.
Well, we included our coach. Our coaches were the ones taking height and weight. They can do that. They can take height and weight. Our coaches were the ones helping, at the checkout station. As I alluded to, the private, even though it was a private school, we were still a very large school. It was comprised of close to 3,000 student athletes. It was one of the larger schools in the Atlanta area. And, there is a way you can recruit enough manpower, work with your AD. I would not have gotten coach buy-in had it not been for my athletic director saying, hey, this is now part of your job requirement is to help out at Sports Physical Day because it benefits your sport. Like, hello, coaches. If your kids don't have a physical, then you don't have players on your team. So, as CJ mentioned, there's a lot of caveats to doing mass sports physicals. There are reasons, as Katie mentioned, why institutions are going away from it. We saw that many years ago in Atlanta, where the risk of liability because of missing something, is so low. I mean, I remember covering a middle school soccer game one time, and a kid went down with a knee injury, and a parent came out of the stand. He goes, I'm a cardiologist. What do you need help with? I was like, nothing to do with the heart. I was like,
I need somebody to come and help remove you from the field.
Yeah, this guy was a senior physician, granted, but you think about it, and I'm not saying he didn't know his name. I didn't know the guy at all. I didn't even know his name. But you think about it, when's the last time he touched a knee? He's a cardiologist. I'm not saying he doesn't know the knee, but in that moment, I knew it better. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's why the physicians who are orthos don't want to listen to heart and lungs. When I worked in the clinical surgical setting, we would have the patients say, doctor, can you check my blood pressure? I feel like it's going to be high or something. He's like, I'm not a physician. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a surgeon. He's like, and worse, I'm a shoulder surgeon. Like he would tell the patients that he's like, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a surgeon. He's like, you need to go see your primary care for that.
Our physicians would always tell us, like, you have to have hands-on practice with heart and lung listening, like, pretty frequently. And I'm curious if that's why Katie's orthodox were like, it is a skill that you have to maintain.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, with that being said, I think that hopefully enlightens our listeners, especially if you're early emerging professionals in this profession, as to why maybe mass sports physicals are slowly fading out in terms of being offered by larger organizations. But it should not stop you if you have those ability and that connections within your community from pursuing that. Any final thoughts on PPEs from anyone here in our group today?
Worth it, be advantageous as we talk about the 365-day thing and more schools in Colorado going towards the model of them being seen in their medical home. Do you think CHSAA would ever push it to this is due every 375
I don't know
days?
if they're allowed to,
or
because I know they
some
get the
obscure thing
standards
like
from
that?
the AMA. So I don't know if CHSAA
Oh,
would
okay.
be able to make that decision. I mean, they may be able to, but I know the initial guidelines are laid out by the American Medical Association, and then from there, I guess it may be up to how the states want to use it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good point. Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
a logistics standpoint, and oh my gosh, the math on that. So scratch that whole thing. Holy smokes, that
Yeah,
would
the
be a
take
nightmare.
home is really push for.
I didn't bring that up.
Yeah,
Don't do that.
well, the take home really is though to encourage to educate your parents on the difference between a sports physical and an annual wellness exam. They're not the same. They're not covered under insurance. Yes, your physician may do it, but here's the risk you run is your physical expiring mid active season, and really push for a sports physical being done. Yes, it may cost $25, $45, but really push for them getting their child a sports physical done during the out of academic calendar months. Because once that is done, now they're covered calendar year to calendar year under academics.
Agreed. This has been a really good conversation, and I don't think it ends here. This is a great first step, like we mentioned, but there's still room for improvement, and I want to use this moment to kind of do a call to action. If you guys agree, and I think all of us kind of would, because looking at other states, we're in a kind of different spot. We're getting there, but we're in a different spot than other states. But use this opportunity to advocate for your kids' health, your athletes' health, for our profession, and use our expertise. And let's keep on pushing this ball moving forward. It's going there. It's getting there. There's momentum. Keep it up. I think we owe it to our athletes to have those conversations and to keep on pushing to make sure we're putting in best practice to make sure everything's safe. So unless there's any last thoughts that somebody's burning. Cool. On behalf of the CHSAA Secondary School Committee and Ryan Hart, I've been CJ Rosenborough, and thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to send in your questions, comments, thoughts. We'd love to hear from you guys. Our email will be in the description. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, take care.